Right. Because there's always this thing when you're recording and you've done something just like you've done there, that somebody can pause the recording and have a really good look at your desktop. So we don't want that to happen, do we?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, just bear with us. In fact, that's actually quite fortunate because someone's just joined us, which means that they've missed all of that. John, welcome, John. Good to see you here. So you haven't missed anything yet, John, because we've just got a very, very small technical thing that Martin's just sorting out at his end. I'm ready when you're ready, Martin. You just need to say the word.
Yeah. Okay, hang on.
And while you're doing that, Robert's said something here. Yeah, some of the old enough remember the fun of live television. Yeah, I've never done live television myself, but I know someone that has, and yeah, very, very, yeah, very, very difficult. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, good. Give it another go? Right, here we go. So I'm going to stop my share now, Martin, and if you now take over the controls, that would be a lovely jubbly, and then I'll shut up and you'll only hear from me when people have got questions or if I think of something myself. Okay, it's looking good. Just need to go to, yeah, that'll probably work. Okay, no, that's even better. That's working. Totally fab. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we have Martin Bailey, Wildlife Services, talking about trail cameras. Please, everyone, if any of you have got any questions, banter, points you'd like to make, stick them up in chat or Q&A, and we will deal with stuff as we go. I would imagine this session is going to last somewhere in the region of what you're thinking, Martin, an hour to 90 minutes max. Is that what you're thinking? An idea?
Well, if we get some input from our viewers, yes.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Right, so I'm going to shut up now, Martin, and you take over. It's your show now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Welcome, everybody. Trail cameras. I'm sure several of you, or most of you, have probably used one at some point. The biggest problem with choosing a trail camera to buy is, of course, there's so many of them out there and such a wide choice. So what I'm going to do is look at what you need to look for in a trail camera for what you want to do. So the most important thing for most of us is going to be the resolution, the results that you're going to get. So the resolution of a still image, which is the physical size of it, basically, the number of pixels, or the resolution of the video, which again is the physical size or the number of pixels. That's probably the most important thing if you want good quality. The speed of a trail camera. So you've got your trigger speed, which is how quickly it will start recording or taking pictures after it detects movement. Obviously, all these trail cameras detect movement, or more accurately, movement of heat. So any animal in front of the camera will be giving out heat, and the camera will pick up the movement of that heat. So anything that's cold against the background will not be picked up. Hedgehogs are a case in point. They tend to not show their heat very readily, and often you can't pick them up very easily. So that's speed. Field of view. This is something that's overlooked by a lot of people. It's something that the manufacturers of the trail cameras don't mention more often than not. And there's nothing worse than getting a trail camera and finding it's actually got quite a narrow field of view. We've got some here that I was quite happy with, but the field of view is only 36 degrees. And to my mind, in most cases, that's just not enough. So that's something to watch out for, because there are some with a field of view as low as that. Obviously, if the field of view isn't wide enough, you're not going to pick up as much as you might want to. LED type. So the LEDs are what create the illumination. They're the ones that emit the light, which is going to illuminate your subject at night. There are different types of LED. You can get white light LEDs on some cameras, not very many. they will give you color video and color stills at night. But for the most part, we use infrared LEDs, which obviously emit light in the infrared spectrum. This is not something that we can see. And there are two different types. There's the no glow, which, as the name suggests, the LEDs don't glow. And then there's low glow, or LEDs that do glow, which can be a problem if you're photographing deer or foxes or other timid species. It could also potentially be an issue for bats. I don't think anybody really knows which frequencies bats can see, but there's almost no doubt that the LEDs that glow, the bats will be able to see that, and that could be disturbance. And obviously for disturbance, you need a license. The illumination range is very important. There's no point trying to take photographs or videos unless you've got enough light. Many of the cheaper cameras don't have a great deal of light, and you end up with a very grainy image or a very grainy video, and the light just drops off very, very quickly into the distance. If you've got an open area like a field, light just dissipates really, really quickly. If you've got reflective surfaces around, then you get a lot more bang for your buck, if you like. And then perhaps most importantly is the usability and reliability of the camera. You need to have a camera that's relatively easy to use, because not everybody's a techie, and it needs to be reliable, especially if you're putting it out for a long period of time. Perhaps you're working with badgers and you need to have the camera out there for several weeks. You need to know that when you go and fetch the camera, it's actually going to have done the job it's supposed to be doing. There's nothing worse than working for a client, going back after 3 weeks, finding your camera doesn't work, and you've got to go and do the whole thing again, assuming you even can. The next thing you need to ask yourself is what you're using your trail camera for. Most people just go out and buy a trail camera and then try and decide what they're going to use it for afterwards. They may find that they've got the wrong sort of trail camera for what they want. Do you need a wide angle lens? You can get wide angle lenses on several trail cameras. They are not an optional extra. They're either wide angle or they're standard lens. So wide angle lens can mean 100-degree lens. It can mean 130-degree lens on some of them. That's quite wide angle, but do you need it? It can be quite useful if you're in a restricted area. Again, if you're trying to photograph badgers and you can't move the camera far enough back because there are trees in the way, maybe you need a wide angle lens for that. For most cases, you don't need a wide angle lens, and that just makes the subject look smaller in the frame. So it has disadvantages as well. How long will you be deploying your camera for? This is really important. Some cameras use a lot of power. If you don't have the right batteries in them, they might not last long enough. Other cameras use very little power, but maybe the quality they produce is not so good. You can deploy cameras for months on end, and I've done so myself over in Poland, trying to get wolves and things. The cameras are out for 7 or 8 months at a time, shooting still images. Some cameras just won't last that long, no matter which batteries you put in them. So you need to bear that in mind when you shoot your camera. How far away will your subject be? Obviously, that's going to relate to your illumination range and also the detectability of the subject. If you've got a small animal that's 20 meters away, it probably won't trigger the camera. If it's 2 meters away, it will. But some cameras are more easily triggered than others. You could get wood mice at 6 or 8 feet away fairly readily on most cameras, simply because they're quite hot little fellas. So think about how far away your subject is going to be. And what size is it? So this is all related to the same thing. If it's a big animal, it's going to be easier to detect at longer distances. If it's fast, it's going to move through the frame pretty quickly, and maybe the camera's not going to be quick enough to trigger. Especially with the cheaper cameras, their trigger speeds tend to be pretty slow. and you may end up with a lot of empty frames where the animal has just zipped through before it could trigger. Also bear in mind how timid your subject is. If you've got foxes or deer, you don't want a camera with LEDs that glow. Do you want to shoot videos, stills, both? Many cameras will allow you to shoot both. You can shoot a still image and then you can shoot a video. You have to bear in mind, of course, though, that by the time it's shot still and switched to video, the animal may well have gone. So is it worth it? Some cameras will only allow you to shoot one or the other. So you need to know what you want. Do you want both? Do you just want videos? Do you want stills? Have a think about that. Of course, there's also time lapse as an option on most cameras as well. Do you need a timer and time lapse? A timer is very useful. As you'll see later, you can set a camera to just shoot at night if you want to get just nocturnal animals. If you've got dogs running around in the garden during the day and you just want to catch the fox at night, set the timer, it'll only shoot at night. You can use time lapse for all sorts of things. We use time lapse here to document the felling of our trees bit by bit. You can use it for plants, you can use it for all sorts of things. Do you need it? Maybe you don't. Some cameras have it, most cameras have it, but some don't have a timer. So bear that one in mind as well. And what are you going to do if your camera dies while it's deployed on a site for a client? This is always worth thinking about before you actually get around to doing it. There's nothing worse than finding out your camera's dead. And as I said before, you may not be able to go back and redo the job. So you need a reliable camera. You need to be familiar with it. You need to have the right sets of batteries in it. So again, these are all things that are worth thinking about. This is an example of a trail camera that has a fairly slow shutter speed. I don't know if any of you can work out what kind of animal that is, but it's obviously showing a lot of movement blur. You can see that the illumination isn't especially even. There's a bit of a hot spot in the middle. Around the edges, it kind of dissipates quite quickly. That's actually a beaver. They're not the most fast moving of animals, but they will often show up movement blur, especially on the cheaper cameras. Again, during the, this one's in the daylight, a roe deer, again, you've got movement blur. Again, this is a cheaper camera. You generally wouldn't get that movement blur, or at least not so much on a better quality camera. This is what happens when an animal gets too close to your camera and you're left wondering what on earth it is. This was in a forest in Poland, and it took me a while to work it out. If anybody's got any suggestions, put them in the comments or the Q&A or wherever you put them in the chat, and perhaps one of you will get lucky, and you're not going to win anything, but perhaps you'll be quicker off the mark than I was when I tried to identify it.
Someone's put something in chat already there, Martin Foy. Oh, a couple of people have put something in chat. Okay, so Graham, oh goodness, right, okay. Here we go. Right, so Graham's suggesting Martin. I don't know if he's meaning Pine Martin or if he's meaning you yourself, Martin. Sue's suggesting wild boar. John's suggesting Pine Martin. Ashley suggesting Pine Martin. There's an awful lot of suggestions of Pine Martin. So don't know, any of those lucky?
Yeah, it sounds almost like we might have some ecologists on the call. So yeah, that's a Pine Martin in a forest in Poland.
How did you work that out? Because I'm just seeing that as yeah. How did they work? Obviously, you worked that out because you maybe had footage either side of it. But what are those guys seeing that I'm not seeing there?
It's got big ears.
Oh, it's the ears, of course. Right, got you. Yes, yeah.
Big ears, big eye.
I've just realised. Yeah, yeah. I can see it now.
Very
Okay.
inquisitive. So yeah, again, that's what happens when an animal's too close. You get what's called burnout in the photography field. It just overexposes it, and you get very little in the way of detail. So it's quite important to get your camera at the right distance from the subject and train your subject to be the right distance from the camera, which we didn't do that time. At the opposite extreme, this image, the animal is a little bit too far away, and it might take you a few seconds to work out what it is. Again, comments in the chat. I'm sure it's not going to be that difficult for you.
I'm putting my microphone on in anticipation to see if anybody actually says anything. Oh yeah, okay, someone's putting up here, Ashley's saying deer. Yeah, so far we've got deer. I think that's all we've got so far. That's the only answer we're getting this time, I think, Martin.
Well, I think she's looking at the wrong picture.
Ah, okay. Well, Ashley's actually a he, but apart from that, you want to know that. Okay. To be fair, he's saying that he's on his phone, so he's got a very small screen. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay. So
that's a
lynx. That's a lynx having a drink.
Wow. And is that in Poland, is it?
You can't see it very well.
Right.
Because the camera is positioned too far away. Obviously, the camera's been positioned to encompass the whole area around the waterhole. And it's just slightly too far away to get a really good shot of the animal.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. You must have been chuffed. You must have been chuffed to bits when you got that. I mean, how happy were you when you got that? Yeah.
Oh, we were very happy. We had our guests with us, and we were collecting the cameras on our first day there. We were collecting cameras that had been left the trip before, and of course we didn't know what was on there. We spent maybe half an hour, 45 minutes going through SD cards from various cameras. Lots of deer, lots of wild boar, lots more deer, more wild boar, very little else, and then suddenly we've got a lynx. So you can imagine what the atmosphere was like. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, oh, good on you. Good
There's some wild boar. Again, you can see on this one that the resolution isn't brilliant. This is a lower end camera. These are Acorn cameras. They're pretty reliable, but the resolution and the results aren't brilliant, unfortunately. But at the time, I was more than happy with those. And then we got this one. And I'm sure that everybody who's watching will know what they are. Even Neil.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow's the thing.
Yeah.
So again, that's an Acorn camera. So the results are not that bad when you've got good light. It's all about light. Photography is all about light, obviously, by definition. If you've got the light, you can get some pretty good results. But once the light starts to dim, and or you're under the tree canopy, the wolves were obviously shot during the sort of winter period when the trees didn't have any leaves, as opposed to the lynx and the boar, which were in summertime. And then we've got the pièce de résistance. That was just a mind-blowing moment.
Oh, wow. Another one. Excellent. And you can see the tail clearly there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to tell people what that was, just in case they missed it on a small screen, or do you want to play it again? I don't know if you can do that.
I don't know if I can. I don't know how to play it back again.
So it's another lynx anyway, yes?
Oh, yeah. I think I can play it again.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Beautiful animal. Beautiful. And this is just about a mile from where we stay. As you can see, it's the same location we got the wolves. Yeah, positioning of trail cameras is absolutely crucial. You've got to know your field techniques. You've got to do your field work, look for your tracks, trails, and signs. And if in doubt, put the camera by a waterhole.
Yeah.
And you never know what you're going to get. This is the same water hole, slightly different position on the camera, but that's the links again. Still image this time, obviously black and white because it's at night. You've got the movement blur there because it's a lower range camera, but still perfectly adequate. You'll notice the noise in the background, the noise of the speckling, if you like, in the image, which shows it's struggling a bit with the light. And there's a wildcat. Again, lucky with the positioning that they came right up to the water in the right place. And there we've got some wild boar and another one in the sunshine, which is a much better quality. So you can get the good quality in daylight, but if you're shooting at night, you really need to have a higher quality camera if you want the resolution. So low-end cameras. This is the Acorn. This is my first camera, and this one did some sterling service. It was left for 8-9 months at a time in the forest, working on just ordinary batteries, shooting still images. The record was 3,558 images from one camera, and it was still shooting when I went to pick it up 8 months later. So, they can be pretty reliable. So they do suffer from...
Sorry, Martin, when you say low end, what's low end for you? I mean, this isn't 25 quid from Aldi low end, is it? I mean, this is...
No.
What we're talking about. Yeah.
This one would be just over the 100 quid mark.
Okay.
The low end ones from Aldi, it's worth talking about them. They are, on the face of it, their quality is not that bad compared to this Acorn here. They're on the same sort of level, but they're cheap for a reason. They're cheap because the quality control isn't as good. They're cheap because the reliability isn't as good. You might be lucky and it might last you for, a year, maybe more. But we have many, many sob stories from people who've had problems with them. They go back to their supplier, who's just a shopkeeper, who says, well, actually, you've got to send it back to China. And nobody wants to hear that because that effectively means it's not worth the effort.
Yeah. And I mean, I've used a couple of these myself, and at least the ones that I've used, the trigger is very slow. I can't remember how many seconds it is, but it's a very slow trigger rate from memory. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be seconds. It just needs to be, if it's 0.9 of a second, it's enough for an animal to get a long way across the frame. Something like a squirrel would be gone. If you've got a cat going across the frame, you might just get the tail or the back end, which is not the end you want. You want the head end. Yeah. So trigger speed is quite important. The other thing is the illumination. As we saw on the beaver shot earlier, you want even illumination because it just makes things so much easier to spot. If you've got something small in the frame and the illumination's uneven and the animal just happens to be in the dark bit, you're not going to see it very well. You're not going to identify it very readily. So it's quite important to get as much light as you can. If you've got low illumination, you've got low range. So it's not going to illuminate very far, which again is going to be an issue. You could solve that with a larger LED array. This one's basically the same camera, but it's got a larger LED array. So therefore you've got more light, but you still suffer from movement blur because the internal workings are still the same. You get more even illumination and a higher illumination range, but it's still not anywhere near as good as some of the higher quality cameras. So do you want higher quality videos? For high quality videos and more even illumination, for greater distance, you need to invest a little more in a higher end camera. So you've got to be willing to dip into your pocket a little deeper for a camera that's going to give you better results. You get what you pay for.
how much are you willing to spend on a trail camera? What's it worth to you? To me, I use the higher end cameras because I want good results that I can share on YouTube. I can share on my trail camera Facebook page. I can use to advertise my trips to Poland. You know, it's an important thing for me. If it's just to identify animals in your garden, you might be quite happy with a 40 quid Aldi camera. The higher end cameras, much reduced movement blur. They've got quicker shutter speed. They've got a higher frame rate on the videos. Much better. More even illumination, simply because the electronics are better. And a higher illumination range because they emit more light, and you need light. So from a better camera, you get better results. Stands to reason. The Acorn cameras have a video frame rate of 15 frames per second at night, which doesn't sound too bad. The higher end cameras, such as some of the Browning cameras, 60 frames a second. 4 times quicker frame rate on the video. So the quality of the video is therefore significantly better. Somebody likened it to a Premier League team compared to a local football team. And you get more even illumination for further into it. This is an example of a video from a low-end camera, and that is a beaver in the snow. They don't spend the whole winter asleep after all. It's not very clear, it's grainy. The illumination is a bit sort of hot spotty. You can see what the animal is, but it's not brilliant. That's obviously a fox, possibly a one-eyed fox. It's got significant movement blur, simply because the camera is at the lower end. You can see it's a fox, but it's not the sort of picture you'd want to put on your wall. On the other hand, this is the sort of quality you can get from the higher end cameras. That's 60 frames per second. Very even illumination. You can not only see which species you're filming, but you can see what it's eating. You can see virtually every hair on its body. And the sound quality is much better as well. I'll let this speak for itself.
So I'm sure you're going to come on to this, Martin, but difference in price range between low end and what you've got here. I mean,
okay, this particular model would be about the £195 mark compared to say 130, 195.
As opposed, so it's like an extra, what, 60, 70 quid or
an
something?
Extra 60, 70 quid, yeah.
Right.
So it's not a huge amount extra. Well, it depends on your point of view. You could say, well, it's, you know, it's a significant amount, but it's not a lot. If you're spending 130 quid, 140 quid, you might as well spend a little bit more and get this sort of quality. That's my view on it. You simply cannot get results like this on the lower end cameras. It's not possible. They're not capable of producing this. And you'll notice also from this video is made up of several clips stitched together. And it gives you an idea of the re-trigger time between clips. So the video stops, then it re-triggers and starts recording again. and it's quick enough that you can just stitch these together and you don't have to worry about it. So I just shoot 10-second videos and stitch them together if there's more activity, and it works pretty well.
And how fast is the, I mean, roughly how fast is the trigger rate on something like this in terms of points of a second or seconds or whatever?
The initial trigger speed on something like this is generally around 0.15, 0.2 seconds, something like that. It does vary depending on the amount of power in batteries, etc. The re-trigger time is, in theory, about the same, but with videos, the trigger time is slightly longer usually. It takes a bit longer for the camera to kind of get set up to shoot the video than it does for stills. So if you've got a really fast-moving animal that's likely to run through the frame really quickly, like a bat, then shooting still images might be a better option. But then, of course, you've got an issue with blur. You're more likely to get blur on a still image with a fast-moving animal than you are in a video with a high frame rate. So it's swings and roundabouts. You know, you've got to weigh up the pros and cons of each feature of the camera, to the species that you're trying to capture and how you're trying to capture it.
Yeah.
Otters are pretty easy. They don't move very fast most of the time, except when they're squabbling over an eel. But you compare that with a fast-moving pipistrelle, and you know, it's obviously a big difference.
Yeah. And I suppose, yeah, sorry, I was just kind of coming there. And when you're talking about a fast-moving animal as well, I suppose the positioning of the camera relative to the direction of travel of the animal is going to be quite important. Like if the animal's flying perpendicular to the line of sight, then it's going to be really fast. Whereas if there's a bit of an angle to it, you've got more chance of picking it up. Is that theory hold true? Is that reasonable what I'm saying there? Yeah.
That is reasonable, yes. Having said that, the cameras trigger more readily if the animal is traveling across the field of view. So if it's traveling towards you, it's less likely to trigger.
Got a question coming in from John. Okay, just let me see. Okay, John is asking, what do you think of the Crenova and the My Boy Now makes? I'm probably saying My Boy Now. Yeah, Crenova and My Boy Now makes each cost about £100. Are you familiar with those at all, Martin?
I've heard of the first one. I've never heard of the second one, which means that I would steer clear of it. Okay. The Crenova it's one of the cheaper, lower end cameras. It's one of those that will probably give you reasonably good quality images, but nothing like this. It just won't be capable of producing the results that this camera can. So personally, I don't bother with any of the cheap cameras, partly because of the quality they produce, and partly because generally they're sold in places like Amazon, where if something goes wrong with it, you're stuffed. Yeah. You're not going to be able to get anybody to help you. You're not going to be able to ring somebody up and say, you know, there's something wrong with my camera, can you help? They say, well, no, we never use the cameras. We don't know what they do. Send it back to China. Yeah. It's a real minefield out there for the people who they really have no clue as to what to get and what these different cameras can do. And they also expect, rightly, I think, that their supplier is going to look after them if anything goes wrong. And often that's simply not the case. Yeah. And more so these days, especially as you know, people are having to cut back on customer service because they've got all sorts of other problems with, you know, political issues and the state of the nation, etc., etc. Yeah. It's far better to buy a better quality camera from a respectable supplier who knows how to use the things. And I'm not just talking about me, there are other suppliers available, but very few of them use them as much as I do. You know, it's like anything, you get what you pay for. If you go to a fly-by-night supplier, that's the kind of service and backup you're going to get.
Yeah. John's just come back with a point. He's saying that he's using the cameras he's mentioned for presence and absence, and has got some good badger footage with them. Yeah, so yeah, but would you agree that the kind of thing that John's talking about, it's going to be considerably better than what you buy in Aldi's? Yeah,
it should be. I've not done any comparisons with them, but for presence absence of badges, it's pretty easy. You don't need anything that's particularly good quality. You just need to be able to say, well, that's a badger.
Yeah,
and they're fairly easy to identify. But if you're working on a different species that's maybe harder to identify, maybe you're working on, I don't know, polecats. You're trying to work out if you've got polecats on this stream, for instance. We know we've got polecats along this stream. We've also got mink. If you use a cheaper camera, will you be able to tell the difference between a polecat and a mink? Maybe by the behavior, but possibly not from the detail of the pelage.
Yeah. Just it's back down to the what's the job, isn't it? It's back down to what's the job, and I suppose there's another thing here. So let me put this to you. Is it better? Let's just gross this up a bit. Is it better to have 10 cameras that you would call low end, or 5 cameras that you would call high end? Because obviously lower end cameras, if a camera's there, it's going to pick up something, in the first place. So there's that consideration as well, I suppose, if you're buying lots of kit.
I would call that the audio moth question. Do you want to have a lot of cheap audio moths out there to get as much data as is possible, and accept the fact that some of them may not survive the deployment, and that maybe it's not quite so easy to get the data off them and identify the species, etc. You've got various limitations with the audio moth. Which do you prefer? That's what it comes down to in the end, is what result do you want, or what result are you going to be happy with? Would you rather spend a bit more but maybe have fewer detectors, maybe have some, I don't know, Anabat Swifts or Wildlife Acoustics SM4s, whatever, get better quality results, get triggered results? I know you can do triggers now on the audio moth, but I think analyzing the calls is probably easier with the higher end detectors. It's personal preference. It's down to what you need, the results you need, and if you're doing it for a client, then it's going to be fairly easy to work out what you need at the end of it. Yeah, and then you just have to make the decision.
Yeah. Got a couple of points coming through here. First of all, Sue's saying, are these cameras useful for assisting with BAT emergence service? So she's not suggesting instead of. So just let me finish what she's saying there before you respond, Martin. So she's saying, are these cameras useful for assisting with BAT emergence survey, maybe concentrating the camera on a particular point, or is it too difficult to get close enough for the camera to trigger particularly fast-moving bats? So do you want to come in with some thoughts there?
Martin? Yeah. Strangely enough, that's exactly what I was just going to talk about.
Okay, well, before you do that, then got another question here from Robert. I don't know if it's a question or a statement. Let me see. Mink trapping rafts are now using cameras to confirm ID prior to trapping, so can see the quality of the image being important. Do you or others hire out equipment? So Robert's asking, Martin, if your business does hire, or are you purely sale? Any thoughts on that?
No, I do hire. I hire out various pieces of equipment, including trail cameras, bat detectors, especially the passive bat detectors, and also thermal imaging kit, and badger gates, and probably other things that will come along at some point. So yes, I hire out stuff, and if it's not on the website, just give me a call. That's what I'm there for.
Wow. So that's something that not necessarily everybody that's in your sector does. So yeah. Okay. Okay, right. Do you want to move on to, well, Sue was talking about bats, and I see you've just put up a slide there. Can you form bats with a trail camera or not? So hold on to your hat, Sue. He's just about to give you his thoughts on that.
Okay, so first point, trail camera's trigger speed is too slow for the camera to catch a bat. The bat may well trigger the camera if it's close enough, but by the time the camera has started to do anything, the bat is long gone. So that's a problem. If you're shooting video at a roost exit, as described, the first bat might trigger the camera, and if shooting a video, the camera should catch any following bats as long as they're following close behind the first one, but not too close behind. So if you've got a whole load of bats queuing up to come out just as it's getting dark or dark enough, the first one comes out. If the others come out relatively soon after the first one, but not straight away, then the camera may well catch them if it's shooting video.
So can I just come up with something there, Martin? So just for me to transfer that into my level of understanding, the camera triggers, it misses the first bat, but the action that's triggered the camera means the video is going to last, for argument's sake, 10 seconds. And if something else happens during that 10-second period, for example, another bat, then there's a chance the camera might pick up that. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So as a means of counting bats coming out of a roost, it's not reliable because you're not going to catch them all. As a means of establishing that a potential roost exit is actually a roost, it's certainly a viable proposition if you have a high frame rate. So you have to have a higher end camera for that.
And I would also sort of say you'd also have to have a reasonable number of bats. It's not going to pick up a bat roost if it's just a single bat that's emerged, which doesn't got caught in the camera. Yeah,
exactly. So things to consider in that sort of situation. First of all, will the light emitted from the trail camera disturb the bats? That's obviously going to be a major consideration. So back to the type of LED that the camera's got, you ideally will need a no glow camera, which emits light at around the 940 nanometer frequency. So that will hopefully not disturb the bats at all, as it doesn't disturb other animals. You have to bear in mind the camera's closest focus distance and its field of view. Obviously, if it's too close to focus properly, then you're not going to get a very clear image. Most cameras will focus at around 1 meter or thereabouts as a minimum. Bear in mind they're a fixed focus lens. They don't move. So the closest focus is generally a meter or just beyond, depending on the camera model. And the field of view, you don't want a narrow field of view. You don't want 36 degrees, which some cameras have. You want, I would suggest, 55 degrees as an optimum, which is fairly standard, but you have to be careful you get the right one. And if too far away, the bats may not trigger the camera or may not be very, very visible. You may not be able to even identify them as a bat, depending on the quality of the video recording. Obviously, if you get a good recording, if it's a brown long-eared, fairly easy to identify as a long-eared bat. You can't, of course, differentiate between grey long-eared and brown long-eared. And if the bat's too close, they'll be overexposed like that pine marten. So that's no good either. So you've got to get the distance right. You've got to mount the camera in the right place and have the right camera to do the job. And of course, if you're going to disturb the bats, you need to make sure you've got a license to do what you're trying to do. So that would be a photography license. So you need a camera with no glow LEDs for bats and for foxes and deer. a camera that shoots high resolution video, a camera with a 60 frames per second frame rate, which is as quick as you can get, a camera with nice even illumination, no hotspots, so the whole frame is illuminated equally, a 55-degree field of view, and a suitable mounting point at the right distance, which is going to be 3 to 4 meters, maybe a little bit closer, but certainly no closer than 2 meters. So I went through my camera list to try and work out which cameras would do this. I was expecting that there would be quite a few. There aren't. You can have the Browning Dark Ops Pro XD, 195 quid. Or the Browning Patriot at 205, which is my favorite camera. None of the others have all those features, as far as I'm aware. I couldn't find another one that had all of those features. So
just coming in there, Martin. Are you looking purely at the cameras that you've got in your stock, or have you looked across the marketplace for other things as well? So just give us a perspective.
I've looked across the marketplace. Okay. I've looked at, I don't currently have Bushnell on the website, although I can get them. I looked at the Bushnells. They don't do all those things, even their top of the range one, which costs a lot more than the Patriot, actually. It's over the £300 mark. I looked at Reconics. That doesn't do, I think it's the 60 frames per second video it doesn't do. It's only 30 frames per second. That's also a much more expensive camera. So really, in this sort of price range, these are the only options. So they're not what you'd call a cheap camera, but they're pretty damn good. And as I say, the Patriot's my current go-to camera now for most things. And it's certainly suitable for doing bats. So is there any more questions about bats and shooting bats?
Yeah, I've come up with something which I've never actually tried this myself, okay, but the theory seems strong, and I know someone that's tried this, but I don't know what kind of camera they were using. We were focusing so far on bats in flight or bats leaving a roost. Obviously, when a bat's come back to a roost, you'll quite often get a scenario where the bat will, for example, land in a wall and then crawl into its roost access hole. And at that point, the animal is going to be moving much more slowly, maybe even slightly hesitant before it goes in. So I've always kind of imagined that the chances of getting a camera to work at a roost point is going to be more reliable when the bats are coming back to the roost as opposed to when they're leaving the roost. Any thoughts on that, Martin? Would you agree, disagree? Does it seem sensible or not?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. As you say, most bats tend to land before they go into the roost. On a building, of course, they land on the wall, they'll crawl up the wall. Same with tree roosting bats, noctules. They'll land on the outside of the entrance and then they'll go in. They might even hang about for a bit outside. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Again, with shooting video, the bat landing should trigger the camera if the camera's at the right range.
Yeah.
And then you should get a video of a bat.
In that kind of situation, I'm not saying it's going to be 100%, but there'd be more chance of finding a small bat roost if bats are coming back to the roost rather than leaving. Listen, Graham's got something up here that he's saying. Right, so Graham's saying that he's found the trigger rate and the sensitivity on the newer Patriot and Dark Ops Pro to be noticeably worse than the older Spec Ops. So Graham seems to be saying that in the newer Patriot and Dark Ops Pros, the trigger rate and sensitivity he feels is noticeably worse. He's asking if you've got any comments on that.
I've not done any tests on those. It's surprising. The Patriot is supposed to have a trigger speed now of, I think it's 0.15 of a second. So I've not come across that. Most of the animals I'm after are bigger and slower than bats.
So you wouldn't necessarily pick up on that. Whereas Graham, I know for a fact that Graham definitely uses some of his kit for doing bats, certainly a good percentage of the time. So
it
he's
will
maybe
of course
noticing that.
depend on. It will of course depend on other variables. It will depend on the temperature of the bat relative to the background, the speed of the bat. There's all sorts of variables. So it's not an exact science. You can't reliably say that any animal moving into the frame of a camera at a given speed is going to give the result that the animal's photographed in the middle of the frame, for instance.
Okay.
Especially with a fast-moving bat that may have just come out of a roost and may not be very warm. It may not trigger as quickly as you would think. So there are variables that are worth considering. Having said that, his results might be perfectly valid. There is variability between individual cameras and certainly between different cameras in the same manufacturer's range. So, it might be perfectly valid observation. But I've not seen it because I've not tried.
Graham's just come back and he said that he was doing a test side by side for foxes in the garden. So he's picking me up quite rightly on my assumption that he was doing this with bats. Thank you, Graham. So anyway, he's busy saying side by side for foxes in the garden. But again, as you say, it could be a difference, or there could be something else that's influencing the test, that's causing Graham to notice that difference, and he's maybe just being...
You may even have interference between the cameras. If you've got two cameras side by side and they're both using infrared light to illuminate an animal, that the camera is relying on its infrared radiation to pick it up, maybe that has an effect. I don't know. How do you test for that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. John's come in with a question or a request. He's wondering any additional comments on using trail cameras to detect bats inside a structure. So, for example, inside lofts. So I would imagine that's a slightly easier thing to do, Martin. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the species. If you've got a species that is going to roost in an open loft area, so brown long-eareds, lesser horseshoes, presumably greater horseshoes, we don't have them up here. They're probably going to be flying around inside the roost before they tuck themselves away or hang up in the case of horseshoes. So it's a perfectly valid way of observing the behavior of the bats and arguably surveying as to whether they're there or not.
Okay, sounds good. I think you can move on, Martin.
Okay. I think this is just one final thing that I put out a camera. I was going to put a camera out on some bat boxes quite some time ago, but the weather was a little inclement. So I decided, firstly, that the bats probably would be safely tucked up in their hibernation sites. And secondly, I didn't really want to be clambering around trees in the icy cold wind with ice all over the place and snow and blizzards and God knows what else. And floods as well, of course, we got them too. So this was just done in the last few days when it started to warm up, and Neil reminded me that I didn't have much longer to do it. So this is an example of what you get from a Patriot on some bat boxes, which just happened to be in the field near here. The camera was set to operate between 5 p.m. and 8 a.m. I was being over generous, I think. So obviously we've got some non-bat species. And we only got one nighttime clip, unfortunately, which, well, that's the sort of result you can get at night. You get very good view of the boxes, and obviously if bats were coming out of those boxes you would see them, but there were no bats.
You had us all on our edge. We were all on the edge of our seats there, Martin.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. It does show that with the camera at about, well, it's probably actually less than 6 feet away from the boxes. The camera ideally would need to be further away. I couldn't get it further away because that would have meant climbing up off the ladder onto a branch with a nice big split in it that was pretty rotten, above a ditch with some planks across it. And I thought, no, that would be a bit stupid, more stupid than usual. So it's at probably less than 6 feet away. So the field of view isn't brilliant, but it might have worked.
Okay.
But the resolution is pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty darn good. I mean, you look at the complexion, the detail in the bark there, and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's
yeah.
And
you'll see the top box is out of focus. That's the one that's nearest to the camera. So we're at the limit of its close focus ability. So that's why the camera needs to be further back.
Okay.
And of course, you'd have a wider field of view then to catch the bats flying.
Of course, yeah.
Maybe identify them to species if they're long-ears.
Yeah.
I doubt you'd identify other species while they're flying, but brown long-eared, pretty good chance.
Yeah.
And that's about it. So any questions?
Okay, well, Martin, I've got to say thank you so much for that. I've actually picked up on some things that I hadn't appreciated myself in the past. So that is hugely useful. And yeah, so if anybody's got any questions or feedback, or just put your hands up if you enjoyed Martin's presentation and you've learned something new or anything, if you're still here, put your hands up. That would be really good. Quite a few people raising their hands in appreciation, Martin. So Martin's details are there. Okay, so his company is wildlifeservices.co.uk, and he's also got an additional web resource, batdetectors.uk. Is that right, Martin? Batdetectors.uk. Yep. It's not a .co, no? Okay.
No, it's .uk.
Yeah, and we've got the telephone number there for him as well. We will put these details underneath the video on the club site as well. So when this goes up on club, if you're watching this as a recorded version later on, just look underneath the video and we'll have links to Martin and stuff. And yeah, so I take it, have you got a reasonable stock of these things on the go at this point in time, Martin? What's the turnaround rate if somebody was ordering something from you?
Depending on the model, the Patriots have just sold out. We just had a big order from down in Devon, I think, somewhere. But there's another batch coming in this week.
Okay.
So generally speaking, we keep the Brownings in stock. Yeah. Some of the others we get sent direct from the distributor because it's less hassle for us.
Okay.
Acorn cameras are available, generally speaking, although again they're getting a bit low.
Okay. Most
cameras I can get the Bushnells fairly readily. I can even get a Reconyx, but they're a bit pricey.
Yeah. Graham's got a point or a question or an observation. He's saying, have you used reading glasses lenses over the camera lens to shorten the focusing distance, for example, for mice inside? Does Martin have any other tips or tricks or hints or whatever like that? I know I'm paraphrasing and I'm adding some words to what you said, Graham, but yeah, I've just tried to make the most out of your question. So are you aware of the reading glasses technique, Martin?
Yeah, what we do is maybe slightly more professional. We use close-up photography lenses. The trick is, well, there's a couple of issues. One is that you've got to find a lens that will fit over the camera lens without obscuring anything else. So that's two issues. The other thing, of course, is that if you're shooting close-up, that will only work during the daytime, not at night, because then you're going to get overexposure.
Okay.
So, if you're shooting, say, wood mice at night at less than a meter, they're going to be overexposed in most cases.
Okay.
That may not be a problem. You could put some kind of diffuser across the LEDs, as long as you don't block any sensors that are in the LED array, to cut down the light. White plastic milk bottles work quite well for that. So it is doable. Some cameras are easier to do than others. We've got a close-up lens kit on the website for the Browning Recon Force and Spec Ops. It fits quite well on there. It uses a like a base mount, which you affix to the camera with black tack, it's called. It's like blue tack, but it's black. And then you can screw the lens on. So that means you can take the lens off and use it normally if you want to. For some of the other cameras, it's a bit more tricky to get a lens fitted. So that's something to bear in mind if you want to use it for that sort of thing. You need to have a camera where you can actually fix a lens to it. The Patriot isn't so good at that because I don't think I've got one here actually. No, it's up on that tree, still by the bat boxes. And it's raining, so I'm not going to get it. But that camera has twin lenses. It has a lens for the daytime and a lens for the nighttime. So it doesn't use an infrared filter, which flicks across depending on the time of day. It has two separate lenses which fit in a square hole on the front of the case. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to fit a close-up lens, which tends to be round, onto that particular camera. I dare say somebody will do it at some point, but some cameras are easier than others.
Any other hints or tips, Martin? Have you got like the stuff the books don't tell you? That.
Oh, you put me on the spot there, Neil.
That's what I'm here to do. And I know this isn't an interview, but I think to be fair, you have given us quite a lot of hints and tips as it is. You've certainly given me quite a few things to think about there, and I'm quite sure others as well.
And if anybody has any questions, then just give me a call. I'm always happy to have a chat. I seem to spend most of my day chatting to people about what's best for them, and what's best for me is not necessarily what's best for you. So let's work out what's best for you guys, and then you can decide, if you want to get it, where you want to get it. And hopefully you'll buy it from somebody who uses them all the time.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's absolutely brilliant. And I can say, ladies and gentlemen, from personal experience, Martin is extremely strong with his customer service and customer focus and getting back to people and all this kind of stuff. That's probably one of your, I don't know if it's a key differentiator, but it's certainly something that people say about dealing with you, Martin. So it takes an awful lot of work to do that. So, good on you. Yeah. Graham's just saying, thanks, Martin, and thanks, Neil. Don't know what you're thanking me for, Graham. I didn't really do that much today, but it's always nice. I'm feeling the love, Graham. Okay, thank you. No, that's brilliant. Okay, Martin, anything else you want to say before we log off? It's the last chance, everybody, to put feedback or questions up on chat or Q&A. And so probably got about a minute or two left if you want to do that. Martin, what do you want to say to finish things off? Anything in particular?
Not on this subject. I'm quite happy to plug what you want. No, I want to plug, but I'm not going to do that unless you tell me I can.
No, you can have a quick plug for anything you want, Martin. Right, so here you go. I'm going to give you a 60-second plug for anything you want to talk about. Does it begin with P by any chance?
It might do, but it doesn't involve the sound of the corn crate. You'll be pleased to hear. So, as you may have noticed in the presentation, I do take people to Poland. I think it's really valuable for ecologists, especially, and anyone who's a conservation land manager, to see what the landscape in the UK used to look like, because we've lost a horrendous amount of biodiversity to the extent that we don't have biodiversity anymore in the UK. You'd be hard pressed to find anything that's biodiverse. Maybe the Caledonian pine forest, what's left of it. But really, there's nothing left in comparison to what we used to have. And if you look behind me, on my screen thing, that is a beaver-created habitat, a well-established beaver-created habitat, which is teeming with life. This is something that we've lost from the UK, hundreds of years ago. And the landscape that we visit in Poland is probably what the UK would have looked like a couple of hundred years ago, which obviously is way before any of us were born. So no ecologists in the UK have ever been diversity in the UK. So if we don't know what it looks like, how can we fix it? Yeah. So that's why I take people to Poland, to see the look on ecologists' faces, often older ecologists than I am, to see the look on their face when they suddenly realize where they are and what they're hearing. They're hearing bird song in profusion. They're hearing insects calling. It's absolutely teeming. And it's, if you've never seen it, it's mind-blowing. It really is. That's all I'll say. Brilliant.
Okay. And I'll let you go on for quite a few seconds longer there, but you've certainly captured the imagination. So if anybody was interested in going to Poland with you, I'm assuming there's details on your website and all this kind of stuff. Is that right, Martin? Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to wildlifeservices.co.uk, after about 30 seconds, a green band will pop up on the bottom of the screen with an orange button. Right. If you go through to that orange button and look for the hyperlink, the text link that says 2019 trip, you've got the log there of what we saw in 2019, and it was the best trip ever. It was just mind-blowing, really was.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, anything else you want to say, Martin, or is that coming to a close?
I think I better shut up now, Neil, and let you get a word in edgeways.
No, not at all. Graham came back with a comment when I said that I hadn't really done that much today, and he came back and he said the reason he was thanking me was that he was thanking me for staying quiet. So yeah, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember that, Graham. But point well made, point well made. Martin, it has been absolutely delightful. I'm going to stop the recording in the next few seconds, but don't hang up yourself yet, Martin. So I would just like to have a few words with you after the recording. But Martin, on behalf of everybody here at BatAbility Club, thank you so much for giving us your time today. It has been absolutely amazing listening to your experiences and your thoughts and your advice. Just got a couple of thank yous coming in there. Got Megan saying thank you, for example. Yeah, so thank you so much for all that. Really, really appreciate it. Did you enjoy yourself? Was it as bad as you were expecting, Martin?
No, it's always a pleasure with you, Neil. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm stopping the recording now for those of you watching this in the future. And there we go. Recording just stopped.